Welcome to Mythos AI, your source for Cliff's Notes on complex subjects. Join Anna and Phil for yet another engaging conversation.
All right, everyone, ready to dive in. We're tackling the future of European competitiveness today. And let me tell you, this report, The Future of European Competitiveness, it's a bit of a beast. But trust me, it's worth it.
Absolutely. Some real eye-openers in here about where Europe stands in the world and where things are potentially headed.
It's like Europe is at this crossroads, right? Facing some massive transformations that could totally reshape its economy. We're talking shrinking population, the rise of new global power players, and this pressing, urgent need to go green.
Yeah, it's a lot, and it makes you wonder, can Europe really maintain its position in a world that seems to be changing faster than ever? I mean, we tend to think of Europe as this bedrock of economic stability known for a high standard of living.
Right, but this report, it doesn't shy away from those hard truths. Like one of the big ones that jumps out is this idea of the middle technology trap. Have you heard of this?
Oh, absolutely. It's a major concern. Think of it this way. Imagine being famous for, say, building those amazing, reliable German cars, but then struggling to get a foothold in the world of self-driving car software.
So it's like they're stuck in between.
Exactly. Excelling at refining what's already there, but not necessarily creating entirely new markets the way we've seen from, say, the US with these huge disruptive tech companies.
And the numbers really drive that point home. This report, it points out that no EU-founded company, get this, in the last 50 years has hit that 100 billion valuation mark.
It's pretty striking when you compare it to the US.
Exactly. Meanwhile, you've got six companies in the US that have blown past the 1 trillion valuation, all in that same time frame. Makes you think, what's in the water over there?
Right. Like, are they missing some key ingredient?
Maybe. It makes you wonder if the EU could learn a thing or two from that U.S. approach to, like their venture capital scene, that willingness to throw money at these big kind of crazy ideas, these moonshots.
It's a really interesting question because Europe has this history of incremental innovation,
Yes.
right? Taking something that exists and making it better, more efficient.
Yeah, refining it, perfecting it.
Exactly. But in a world where entire industries can pop up practically overnight, is that enough? I mean, the U.S., with that Silicon Valley risk-taking venture capitalist mindset, they seem to have mastered the art of disruption. So the question for Europe becomes, can they capture a bit of that spirit without sacrificing the things that make them unique, their social model, their values?
That is the million-euro question, isn't it? And it makes you wonder, how will all of this play out as they try to balance these economic realities with this global push towards a greener future? Because let's be real, going green, it's not always cheap, right? I mean, think about your own energy bills lately. Ouch, right?
Yeah.
Now imagine those bills, but like 2, maybe even 3 times higher.
Yeah. And that's the reality for a lot of European businesses, especially when you look at those electricity costs. And then on top of that, you've got the skyrocketing price of natural gas. It's a tough spot to be in, trying to balance those ambitions for a greener future with the need to stay competitive globally.
It does feel like a bit of a catch-22. But there's a glimmer of hope in this report, right? Something about how Europe's actually ahead of the curve when it comes to some of these clean technologies.
Absolutely. The report's not all doom and gloom. It actually highlights Europe's strength in clean tech innovation. They're doing a lot of things right when it comes to developing these cutting-edge green solutions.
Okay, so they've got the brains, but can they turn those ideas into actual, tangible products, industries?
That's the million-dollar question. Can they turn that innovation into a true manufacturing advantage? Because if they can't scale up their production, there's a risk of being left behind. You've got powerhouses like China with this massive manufacturing capacity just waiting in the wings.
Right, it's like inventing the electric car, but then someone else figures out how to mass produce it at a price everyone can afford. Being first doesn't always mean you win the race. And this is where I started to get a little uneasy reading this report. They talk about how reliant Europe is on other parts of the world, especially for crucial stuff like raw materials and those all-important semiconductors.
It's a major vulnerability, and the report doesn't shy away from that. It's like they're saying, hey, this is a big deal. We need to talk about it. Because when you think about it, even if Europe manages to nail this whole green tech revolution, if they can't actually get their hands on the materials they need to build these amazing technologies, they're still stuck.
It's like having all the ingredients for a gourmet meal, but then realizing you left the oven at the store. Not very helpful. Give us the numbers. What are we talking about here? How reliant are they?
Well, the report uses this example, and it's a bit of a jaw dropper. Did you know that China processes, get this, something like 35 to 70% of those essential raw materials? Lithium, cobalt, the stuff that makes our smartphones, our electric cars, basically all our modern tech tick.
Okay, now that's a number that makes you stop and think. It's like all your eggs are in one basket and someone else is holding that basket. You've got to imagine that's keeping some European leaders up at night. So what can they do about it? It's not like they can become self-sufficient overnight, right?
Right, they can't just flip a switch and suddenly have all their own resources. But the report argues they can't just sit back and hope for the best either. They need to be more strategic, more proactive. And one of the key things they suggest is a pretty bold move, really boosting their own capacity, especially when it comes to things like defense and space exploration.
Interesting. So it's not just about economic security, it's about national security too.
Exactly. They're linked more than ever in this day and age. The report's point is that in those fields, defense and space, being a technological leader, it's not just about prestige. It directly translates into global influence and security. If you want a seat at the table when decisions are being made, you've got to bring something to the table. And in the 21st century, that something is often technological prowess.
It's about controlling your own destiny, both economically and geopolitically. It makes sense. So how do they actually make that happen? What are the concrete steps? I mean, the report mentions a complete overhaul of how they approach innovation, right? Like a fundamental shift.
Yeah, it's not just about doing more of the same, it's about doing things differently. And they're talking about a complete revamp of their research and innovation programs. The report's really clear on this. They need to be laser-focused, efficient, and geared towards supporting those groundbreaking, game-changing innovations, not just incremental improvements.
So less tweaking around the edges, more bold, ambitious leaps forward.
Exactly. Less, how can we make this slightly better? And more, what if we completely reimagine this? What's the crazy, impossible idea that just might change everything?
Love that. But
Right.
how do you flip that switch? That feels like a massive cultural shift, not just a policy change.
It is, and it won't be easy. They're talking about changing an entire mindset, a whole culture of innovation. But the report does get specific. Like, one of the things they suggest is basically doubling the budget for their next big research and innovation program, bumping it all the way up to a cool $200 billion.
Wow. Okay, so they're putting some serious money where their mouth is. But as we were saying before, money isn't everything. How do they actually make sure those billions are being spent effectively, that they're actually moving the needle?
Right. It's about spending smarter, not just spending more. And one of the really intriguing ideas in this report is taking a page out of the U.S. playbook. They actually suggest creating a European version of DARPA, that agency that's been behind some of America's most groundbreaking technological breakthroughs,
Yeah, DARPA. They're the ones who basically invented the internet, right?
among other things. The point is, they're not afraid to take risks, to fund those long-shot ideas that just might change the world. And that's what the report is suggesting Europe needs. An entity that's solely focused on those high-risk, high-reward projects, the kind that could lead to those moonshot moments that redefine entire industries.
So it's about injecting a bit of that Silicon Valley audacity into the European system.
In a way, yes, but it's also about playing to Europe's strengths, because here's the other thing. The report recognizes that Europe doesn't need to, and frankly can't, become a carbon copy of Silicon Valley. They have their own unique strengths and areas of expertise. So how do they leverage those?
That's the big question.
Yeah.
So what's the answer? How do they take these innovative ideas out of the lab and turn them into tangible things in the real world? We've all seen great ideas that never quite make that leap, right?
It happens all the time, and the report addresses this head-on. They propose something called an AI Vertical Priorities Plan, which I know sounds a little bureaucratic, but bear with me, it's actually a pretty fascinating concept.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Break it down for us. What's so special about this AI plan?
So instead of trying to be everything to everyone, it's about focusing. The report suggests that Europe should really hone in on those sectors where they already have a competitive advantage.
So playing to their strengths.
Exactly. Things like renewable energy, sustainable manufacturing, green technologies, and they'd bring together the best and brightest in those sectors, companies, researchers, policymakers, to develop and implement AI solutions specifically tailored to their needs.
So it's like creating these hyper-focused innovation ecosystems, everyone working together toward a common goal.
Precisely. And to really get these collaborations off the ground, the report suggests creating AI sandboxes.
AI sandboxes, like literally sandboxes.
No, not literal sandboxes. Think of them more like controlled environments, right? Places where companies can test out new AI technologies, get feedback from regulators, all in this kind of safe space where they're not bogged down by bureaucracy. It's about finding that balance, encouraging innovation, while also making sure it's done responsibly.
So it's like a testing ground for the future, a place where they can experiment and try new things without, like, breaking the whole system.
Exactly. It's about being smart and strategic.
Makes sense. Speaking of strategic, we've talked a lot about how Europe is playing catch-up in the whole cloud computing game, right?
Yeah.
They're lagging behind those U.S. giants. Any hope of closing that gap?
It's a tough one. The report's pretty honest about that. They pretty much admit it's probably too late to build direct competitors to companies like Amazon or Microsoft in the cloud space.
Yeah, those guys, they've got a pretty big head start.
It's hard to catch up when you're that far behind. But, and this is important, the report argues that doesn't mean giving up completely. Instead, they suggest a two-pronged approach.
Okay, I'm listening. What are these two prongs?
So prong number one is all about doubling down on what they call sovereign cloud solutions. Essentially, a European version of the cloud, but built on European values with a really strong emphasis on data security and privacy.
Okay, so carving out their own niche, catering to governments and industries that really prioritize those things.
Right. It's about giving people a choice. And the second prong is all about, well, being pragmatic. They know they can't completely isolate themselves in this globalized digital world.
Well, it's not about building walls, it's about finding common ground.
Exactly. So they propose working with the U.S. to try and establish what they call a digital transatlantic marketplace. It's about finding a way to guarantee fair competition and data security for everyone, both EU and U.S. companies. A win-win, ideally.
It's about finding that balance again, right? Collaboration versus competition, protecting your interests while also engaging in this global digital landscape. It's a tightrope walk. But even with all the best technology and the smartest strategies, you need the right people to make it all work, right? And the skills to match. It's true, you can have all the fancy tools in the world, but if you don't know how to use them. And this report, it doesn't pull any punches. It basically says that Europe's current approach to education and training, well, it's not really cutting it.
It's outdated, yeah. They're playing catch-up, and the report is a bit of a wake-up call. They're saying, look, the skills people need to thrive in this new economy, they're changing faster than we can keep up.
So what's the solution? We just start throwing more money at schools and universities.
Yeah.
More coding classes for everyone.
If only it were that simple. It's about a much more fundamental shift, a whole rethink of how we approach education. We can't just focus on teaching the skills that are in demand today. We need to anticipate what those skills will be 5, 10, 20 years down the line. It's like trying to hit a moving target, right?
Totally. The future of work is this constantly shifting landscape.
And we need education systems that are agile and adaptable enough to shift with it, which means much closer collaboration between educators, policymakers, and, crucially, business leaders. They've got to be in constant dialogue, always looking ahead, trying to anticipate those changes.
It's that whole lifelong learning thing, right? It's not just about what you learn in school anymore. It's about constantly upskilling, adapting, being open to new things.
Absolutely. The learning never stops. But here's the thing. Even with the best education system, the most innovative ideas, none of it matters if Europe can't act decisively. And that brings us to what might be the most crucial takeaway from this whole report: governance.
Right, because we can talk about innovation and green technology and all these grand visions for the future, but if you can't actually implement them, what's the point?
Exactly. It's all about execution. And the report, it doesn't mince words. It basically says that the EU's current governance structure, it's just not equipped to handle the speed and complexity of the challenges they're facing.
It's like trying to steer a speedboat with the steering wheel of a cruise ship, right?
Yeah.
Just way too slow, too cumbersome.
That's a great analogy. So what's the solution? Well, ideally, they'd do a complete overhaul, maybe even some treaty changes. But let's be realistic, that's a long shot, politically speaking.
Yeah, those things take forever. So what's the more, shall we say, pragmatic approach?
They call it a renewed European partnership. It's about working within the existing system, but making it work better.
Okay, so less revolution, more evolution. But what does that actually look like on the ground? What needs to change?
They break it down into 3 main areas. First, refocusing, getting really clear about the most critical issues, the ones that will have the biggest long-term impact, and streamlining their agenda accordingly. No more spreading themselves too thin.
Prioritize, prioritize, prioritize. Makes sense. What's next?
Speed. They've got to accelerate action and integration, break down those silos between different countries and institutions, and make sure everyone's pulling in the same direction. Unity is key.
No more working in isolation.
Got it.
Got it. And the last one?
Simplicity. The EU has a bit of a reputation for bureaucracy, and this report acknowledges that. It calls for a major effort to simplify the rulebook, make it easier for businesses to navigate, to access funding, to innovate without being bogged down by red tape.
Music to every entrepreneur's ears. Cut the red tape. Unleash the innovation. But, and I'm sure you're thinking the same thing, how do you do all that without sacrificing what makes the EU unique, those high standards, those social protections? It's a tough needle to thread.
It is, but the report does offer some concrete ideas. For example, to accelerate action, they propose taking all their existing coordination mechanisms, which are currently kind of all over the place, and consolidating them into a single, more streamlined competitiveness coordination framework. Think of it as a central command center for Europe's competitiveness strategy.
Love it. One-stop shop for all things competitiveness. Very efficient. And what about the money? Because, it's one thing to set priorities, it's another to actually fund them.
You're telling me. Well, the report suggests creating a dedicated competitiveness pillar within the EU budget, essentially earmarking funds specifically for these key strategic initiatives.
Put your money where your mouth is. I like it. And what about that rule book? Any concrete ideas for how to make it less daunting for businesses without compromising on the EU's core values?
They have a few ideas. Simplifying those funding programs so it's easier for businesses to actually get access to the money. Streamlining regulations where possible, eliminating redundancies, making things clearer and more user-friendly.
So making it easier to do business in Europe without sacrificing those high standards they're known for.
Exactly. It's about finding that sweet spot. And ultimately, it's about fostering a more agile, more responsive EU, one that can adapt to a rapidly changing world and seize those opportunities as they arise. Because the world's not slowing down anytime soon.
No, it's only getting faster, more complex, more interconnected. It's a lot for any government to navigate, let alone a collection of governments trying to act as one.
It's a massive undertaking, no doubt, but this report makes it clear the stakes are high. Europe's at a crossroads. They've got some tough choices to make, but they also have a chance to really emerge from this moment stronger and more competitive than ever.
And then whether they can actually pull it off, well, that's the big question, isn't it? This report, it lays out a potential roadmap, but it's up to the EU, its leaders, its citizens to decide if they're ready to take the wheel and chart that new course.
And that's a decision that will have implications far beyond Europe's borders. Because what happens in Europe in this globalized world, it affects us all.
That's a great point to end on. This isn't just about Europe. It's about the future of the global economy, the future of innovation, the future, really, of how we address these collective challenges. So as you go about your day-to-day, think about it. What role do you want Europe to play in shaping that future? Because it's a conversation that's just getting started. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive, everyone. Until next time.
Thanks for listening to Mythos AI. Stay tuned for more concise insights. And remember to hit the like button and subscribe for future episodes.